start the recording. There we go. So good afternoon. My name is Deborah Sloan, and I'm the president of the Northwest Ceramics Foundation. I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation, Kate Metten and Cathy Terepocki, International Day of Creativity and Innovation, a discussion. But first, we have some housekeeping. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation is grateful for and acknowledges it operates on land that is the unceded shared traditional territories of the Coast Salish, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We stand in solidarity with all communities marginalized due to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age. And we commit ourselves to opposing racism in all its forms. If you're not on our mailing list, please go to our website, www.nwcaf.ca. And at the top of every page, there's a blue button. And once you press on it, it gives you a form to join. And then we can notify you of all the things coming up. And it's all the news comes to you. One event we want to let you know about is the upcoming sale of noted potter John Reeve, who sadly passed away in 2012. He studied at the Vancouver School of Art, later apprenticed and was the studio manager for a period of time at the Leach Pottery in St. Ives, Cornwall. He has a storied career in Canada, the US, and Europe, exerting a powerful influence through his teaching and work. He made his final work at Dunbar Pottery here in Vancouver, and it is this work that will be on sale at Visual Space Gallery, 3352 Dunbar Street, May 3 and 4, between 10 and 4. I'll put this in the chat. More information, see our website under news. And the monies are going to his widow. For the duration of the talk, we ask you to mute yourselves and turn off your video. This will improve the transmission. At the end of the talk, we'll have a discussion period, which Carol Mara will monitor. And then you can turn your video back on. You can type questions. Please type your questions into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Or during the discussion period, just ask to be recognized. So the talk is being recorded, and these talks are being posted on our website, www.nwcf.ca, and they are being watched by hundreds of people, so it's very successful. Now, to introduce our two speakers. Kate Metten is a multifaceted artist whose educational background includes studies at Concordia University in Montreal, Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina, and Emily Carr University, where she earned her BFA. Under the mentorship of Vancouver ceramicist Galen Nagan, she honed her craft through apprenticeship and furthered her skills through local and international residencies for both ceramics and painting. She has exhibited her paintings and ceramics in solo and group shows. For 2 years, Kate operated a ceramic atelier and storefront on Main Street in Vancouver, from which space she produced, sold her work, conducted workshops, curated exhibitions, and collaborated with a number of designers and businesses, including Oak and Fork and Ubuntu, is that how I say it? Canteen. In 2023, Kate was awarded the Judson Beaumont Emerging Artist BC Achievement Award. Cathy Terepocki studied ceramics at the Alberta College of Art and Design, earning her BFA in 2004. She moved to Yarrow, BC, where she maintains a studio and diverse practice of exhibiting, teaching, designing, and producing multiple collections of well-designed functional ceramics. In 2016, Cathy produced designs for Anthropology, which was launched in the spring of 2018. Much of her current work involves working with wild clay, I like that term, from the Chilliwack River, which runs near her rural home and studio. In 2016, she was named Western Living Magazine's Maker of the Year, and in 2022, Cathy received the BC Achievement Applied Art and Design Award. Our two speakers will each open with a short presentation about their work, and then they'll be joined in conversation by our board member, Dr. Carol E. Mayer. So I am handing this over now.
To me?
Yes.
Thanks, Deborah.
Unless Carol wants to say something. No? Yeah, so, oh, Carol, you're muted. Oh. You're muted, Carol.
Carol.
You're muted. So Carol will sort that out.
Is it done?
Yeah, now you're on.
Gosh, I don't know what happened. Sorry. It's sort of being a Luddite and putting me in charge of these things. When we were first thinking of bringing Kate and Cathy together and thinking of a theme that would initiate some conversation between them, it was purely fortuitous that I found that United Nations has declared today, of all days, World Creativity and Innovation Day. And as it happens, both of these ceramic artists are both incredibly creative and incredibly innovative. And yet, if you're working with clay, you may think that those two terms are almost an oxymoron. Is that I have found that most clay artists are brilliantly creative, but not necessarily innovative in the sense they are innovative, of course, in their work, but not necessarily in the way they bring their work to the world. You know, they're too good at what they do. They focus in, and people don't always see just how wonderful they are. I want to just read you very briefly what the UN says about creativity. First of all, they say it's an infinitely renewable resource. Of course it is. But they then say creativity drives our ideas and emotions, as well as our ability to connect, to question, and to be understood. That culture and creativity are more than an expression of identities. They are livelihoods, careers, and economic opportunities for millions of people around the world, especially women, youth, and vulnerable groups. The creative economy has the power to drive sustainable development. And the creative economy is an evolving concept which builds on the interplay between human creativity and action and ideas and intellectual property, knowledge, and technology. If you break all that down, the way I look at it is usually people, particularly people that work with clay, are brilliantly creative, would love to be innovative, and yet are not rewarded. I don't think as much as they should be, and not recognized. So I'm hoping that we can start this conversation with two people who both have received the BC Achievement Awards. They're both very, very creative. They both look to the environment, which is so important, particularly to the history and craft of ceramics. And at the same time, they have reached out into the world to put themselves out there. So let's see how that works. Let's start with Kate.
All right. Thank you, Carol. I'm going to share my screen. How's that for everybody? Can you see what I've got on my screen there? Yep. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for being here. I'm Kate Metten, and I'm an artist, a researcher, and an entrepreneur. And I work at the intersection of painting and ceramics. This is an older image of my work from a time at the end of my apprenticeship in 2017, at a time when I was wrapping up an apprenticeship with Guyland Gann. And I've now been a full-time artist for 7 years, and my work has evolved considerably from this time. So today I'll be walking us through some of my past exhibitions, as well as talking about my recent storefront project and plans for the future. This was my grad show installation from 2017 at Emily Carr University of Art and Design. It's titled "The Ceiling Was a Grid," and it exists as a ceramic still life in dialogue with a series of gingham oil paintings. The sculptures are thrown on the potter's wheel and make obvious reference to function and the domestic sphere, although function is inverted through abstraction, creating new ways of interpreting the vessels and the phenomenological nature of objects. I oscillate between my two practices, painting and ceramics, and I like to explore bridges between them materially. Like, for example, chrome oxide, ochre, tin, and titanium are raw elements that I use in both of my practices. And there are a lot of formal considerations like surface quality and color and composition that are reflected in both histories that I draw on as well. Um, these these material dialogues have been explored by other artists in the past, such as Picasso, Betty Woodman, and locally Cathy Falk, among others who have pioneered a space for me to think about ceramics for a contemporary gallery context, rather than just being rooted on the table. So in 2017, I created a triptych dedicated to the covariant formalism for quantum field theory. My professor, Ingrid Koenig, who at the time was artist in residence at Triumph Particle Accelerator at UBC, invited me to be one of the artists involved in the first iteration of the Leaning Out of Windows art and physics collaboration, which created a dialogue between art and science to bring new research and content into contemporary art. So we were assigned a physicist to work in dialogue with, and then asked to interpret new research on antimatter. And here's an image of the particle accelerator at UBC, where they're splitting atoms to create medical isotopes and to work towards healing cancer. Personally, I was really interested in a shared cyclical momentum in our process. And I created this kinetic sculpture. I'm going to show you a video. So this has moving parts, and it functions as a metronome. So it's activated by touch. And then it rocks and creates a sound that mimics a metronome and essentially measures time. So this project opened up a lot of ideas for me in terms of working across disciplines, and it helped me juxtapose my material history with new research in physics. And I later adapted this process to work in dialogue with a neuroscientist while I was in Berlin, which I'll discuss later. Here are some images from my apprenticeship with Guylan and Wayne on Hornby Island. Here, Wayne actually caught me a bird in the studio, which was really special. And that's his gas kiln on the right. And then here I am with Guylan digging up river clay. So I grew up playing with river clay on the banks of the Fraser River in Marpole, and had the privilege of having a family member who would bring me to Hornby Island for summer vacations. And she was an art collector, and she had a relationship with the Gann family. And so she set up watercolor lessons with Anne. And as a child, I was like really strongly influenced by just what an amazing and kind of a magical space to go visit Wayne's studio. I just totally thought he was honestly like a wizard, and it just sparked all these ideas for me as a young kid. So I started working with clay for the first time when I was around 7 years old. And Guylan and I reconnected at Emily Carr. She was my professor and then invited me to share studio space with her for 2 years. And that evolved into a mentorship grant through the BC Arts Council. And my projects during our grant focused on raw material sourcing and collecting clays throughout BC to bring in ideas of place and site specificity and the politics of land use into my materiality. So this is a ball mill, which many of you might be familiar with, but it's a porcelain barrel with porcelain balls inside, and you can put rock and different pigments in there, and it will spin on a motor and then create slurries out of the found clays. So we tested them on a variety of different clay bodies and then put them in different atmospheres to come up with some new glazes. And this is a 30,000-year-old history, which I was interested in adapting to a contemporary context. So as someone who lives in a city, I was starting to look at urban land cuts like construction sites as a place where I could access clay. And I would start by just sort of observing the excavation of a development and then knowing when they would reach a sedimentary clay layer, I would approach the construction workers with bags for clay and ask them to fill up the bags of clay for me. And a lot of the time they were confused, but it would lead to some interesting projects. So this site specifically marks the original shoreline of Cole Harbor from 100 years ago, before landfill built over the shoreline to expand the urban footprint. Using a material that's loaded with history and content adds a lot of significance to the sculpture. And at that time, I was making these thrown ribbon forms that were wood-fired and very evocative of the feminist history of contemporary ceramic sculpture, pioneered by artists like Judy Chicago and Linda Benglis to invert ideas of domesticity and femininity. This wall sculpture was exhibited at the NCCA, the National Ceramic Conference in Minneapolis. It was part of a survey of contemporary ceramic abstraction at the Catherine E. Nash Gallery. And yeah, here it is installed, and there was a catalog that was printed with the show. That's the cover on the left there. And around that time, I was painting quite a bit. And I would say painting was almost like my primary practice around that time. Although always making tableware sort of as my bread and butter, which I'll touch on a little bit more. But yeah, so these are images of paintings from my very first solo show at Willa Ballet. And Will and I have worked closely together on a number of projects since then, including a second solo show and trips to, he brought me to Art Toronto and then Combine Art Fair, which is locally. And painting is about looking, and I'm very interested in like the optical effects of painting and what happens in our brain when we look at reductionist imagery. So I started using this glaze made out of neodymium, which is a rare earth mineral that changes color based on light source. So I'll show you a video. This piece is called Neodymium Sundial, and it was hung in the window at Will's gallery. Hung in the window. So on the left there, you can see it's blue when it's exposed to fluorescent light. That's not a shadow. It's actually a difference in, like, the glaze has different reactivity based on natural light or fluorescent light. And in natural light, it's lavender, and in fluorescent light, it's blue. And so for me, it was an opportunity to bring in those ideas of color and perception into the ceramic materiality and have ceramic sculpture dialogue with the paintings. So this is a glaze I've used again, and it's often a sculpture glaze that I use to create reference and bridge between the ceramic and the painting. We also did a dinner party at Will's gallery at the time of my first solo show. And that was a really special experience because I think as a potter, it's kind of a service I can provide to the gallery. It's an opportunity to like bring the gallery's like stable of artists together and collectors, and to have an event and an experiential event together. So at this time, I was keeping my tableware quite separate from my exhibition practice. And this was sort of the first time that I had brought like tableware into the gallery. For me personally, what I like about my functional practice is that it's really like my bread and butter. It's how I generate income. And at the beginning, it gave me a lot of freedom to live a studio life where I could have time to experiment and build skill and build a material vocabulary, like my palette of glazes that can be used to make art or commercial ceramics. And I think, you know, many artists struggle to find flexible work that allows them to be in the studio full time. And I feel grateful that like my tableware practice provides the freedom to live a full-time studio life. And the tableware is more practical, more commercial, and more consumable for an everyday market, but it gives me freedom to experiment. So there's always a balance between the tableware practice that I have and the exhibition practice. And the next show I did was at the Nanaimo Art Gallery. It was called We Do Not Work Alone. And the curator, Jessie Birch, hold on one sec. The curator, Jessie Birch, invited me to make work inspired by the history of BC ceramics. So reflecting on my apprenticeship with the Gann family and the lineage of BC potters who've come before me. So I created an installation of thrown forms that again refer to function, but are abstracted and have collaged elements together to sort of like break them away from the round. One of the pieces is this kinetic link that is, it's two thrown composite forms that are assembled into a figure eight, and then there's a ball inside. So it functions like a game. And while I really think that we understand ceramics through use and through engagement and touch. And so even though I was working in a white cube space, I was still thinking about if a viewer were to handle this, like what would their interaction be? And so thinking of ways to bring in kinetic and moments of touch. And here again, I'm using the neodymium glaze. This is in Berlin. This is work that I made in dialogue with Radoslaw Martin-Cici, who is a professor in neuroscience at the Free University in Berlin. And I wrote to him to ask if we could open up a dialogue similar to what I did in correspondence with the physicists. And I was really interested in generating a new body of work that takes like the foundation of Bauhaus color theory and brings it into new context with research in neuroscience and pattern recognition and what happens in our brain essentially when we're looking at reductionist imagery. And so I'm very influenced by Bauhaus as a painter and a potter, because that school was one of the first places where those histories really intersected. And I had the privilege of staying at the Dessau campus in Berlin, or in the Dessau campus in Dessau, when I was in Germany last. And it was a very special experience. I also, oh, here, I'll show you a quick video of, this is the work installed in more of a gallery setting. And so again, it's paintings in dialogue with a ceramic still life. And it's fluorescent lighting in the gallery. But what I liked about installing it in the vitrine outside was that the glaze would change at different times of day, depending on what was dominant, whether it was natural light or fluorescent light. And also during my travels in Berlin, I connected with a curator named Lee Plested, who was organizing the 50th anniversary of Western Front, which is the first artist-run center in Canada. And he invited me to make a tea set to use in a contemporary tea ceremony. So I made this teapot and a set of 4 chawan, and then they were doing live performance and screening of Western Front's archive. So that was a very special opportunity and invitation that came out of the Berlin residency. While also wrapping up my residency in Europe, I visited the Leach pottery in St. Ives and was very inspired by Bernard Leach's original atelier, where he had production studio and apprentices and a gallery space sort of all in one roof and under one roof. And so when I came home, I was invited to open, basically I had this space offered to me. And I worked in this block for a decade at Rath Art Supplies. And coming back from Montreal, I took some time away from school and I was just making art on my own terms, starting to work for artists professionally and meeting a lot of artists through my job at Rath Art Supplies. And I worked there for a decade and while my career started to bloom. And then when I came home from Europe last, they offered me this storefront, and I had I had to say yes. It was just a pretty amazing opportunity. So, although it was a project that was honestly bigger than me, like it was something that I couldn't do on my own, and it required a lot of assistance, and um, it was yeah, there's a lot I can say about the shop, but it was a huge success, and basically the business kind of became bigger than me. And this having like a location really situated the work and created kind of this like evolving exhibition that like people would come back and see how my product and how my work was evolving, and they would watch me throw. That was one of the biggest adjustments, was going from having a private studio practice to throwing in public space and having an audience daily, essentially, and having an open door to the public while I'm in my creative process. So that was a really big adjustment, and I'm really grateful. I had like a really strong team of studio assistants who worked with me, and who the studio assistant helped with a lot of preparatory work like weighing and wedging, glazing, and also being a social buffer, so that if people were coming in to shop, I didn't have to stop my creative work. And my assistant could greet everyone, and I could focus on my throwing. And I think, every entrepreneurial experience is a lesson learned. And um, I'm, I learned so much about business, and I learned so much about what it means to be a business owner and to be a maker. And everything I make is hand thrown. So it's worth acknowledging that like it's not easy work, I think there's a huge rise in people transitioning into ceramics as a career path. And I think I need to be transparent about the reality that like I in order to pay my $4,000 a month rent, I had to produce 800 pounds of clay a month. That's how much clay I was working through. And there's a huge level of physical endurance required to maintain a project like this for 2 years. And it's honestly, throwing for 8 hours a day is like being an athlete. And so it's so important to like condition your body, to train your body, have a physio, get massages, and all of the things to ensure that you have longevity in your practice. I'm in a position now where the demand, because the storefront, it created like so much visibility and name recognition with the work, which was amazing. But now I'm in a position of maintaining that level of production, and I'm pivoting in my work, and I'm kind of interested in looking to some industrial processes like the ram press and slip casting to simplify certain aspects of the studio, and also scale things down so that I can have more space for my experimental practice. Because I would say right now I'm a little out of balance in terms of my functional practice is sort of squishing out my experimental practice, and it's really the work for the gallery that I love the most, truthfully. So here's a little studio tour of we had 2 wheels in the back and then gallery in the front, and it was street level, so lots of people walking by, lots of stop and chats and visits. And I'm very deeply embedded in like East Vancouver. I'm very lucky to have a rich community of artists and friends in East Van, and it was very special to create space and a platform for other makers. So we were organizing events and sales with lots of applied artists. So we had a glass blower and a furniture pop-up, and it was really special to share the platform because I just didn't feel like it should be just about me. And we have a shortage of space to exhibit art in Vancouver. And so it was kind of an essential role to move into curatorial work so that I could expand my platform and invite other artists in. I also really got to feel what it is to be on the other side of the mentorship role. And I'm very lucky to have had so many supportive studio assistants who are aspiring potters who I could teach and who could learn from being in this professional environment with me. And it was, very special. That's one of the things I'm taking away most, honestly, is that the project was truthfully just too big for me to do alone. But it allowed me to build a lot of relationships. And I'm probably coming close to time, aren't I? Okay, good. So I'm going to wrap things up. There's some more images of the storefront. Here we are having some pop-ups and events. And the kiln was in the back, so I was doing all my firing. All the material process was on view for the public to see. And we grew into workshops, had lots of classes. Here's some images of my standard wear, very simple, minimal, like monochrome, and some styling that I'm doing with interior designers, Francesca Albertazzi. And these images are starting to circulate. I've collaborated with Simons, which is, they have a platform called Fabrique 1840, which is for small batch designers. And it helps introduce my work to audiences across Canada that I would not have access to otherwise. And I've also collaborated, this is my ring vase, which is circulating at the moment in Vanity Fair, House and Garden. And then we've got campaigns with Vogue coming out next month. And one thing I want to talk about a little bit too, that because I am very interested in the history of ceramics, and I do have a client-based practice. So people come to me and they have needs. And so I've moved into funerary wear, and out of the BC Achievement Foundation came a very special invitation to work in collaboration with Douglas Copeland and curator Sheila Hall to produce funerary wear for the late Sam Carter, who is the founder of the BC Achievement Foundation. And he passed away just a couple weeks before the award ceremony. And they were looking for funerary urns, but didn't find anything that they liked. And they saw that I was doing funerary vessels. And so they actually invited me to do funerary ware made out of cremains. So it's an ash glaze that is very specific to the person, and it just embodies a spirit essentially. So it was a very interesting collaboration. And as a contemporary artist, I find it's really important to look to history. I look to history first rather than what other contemporary artists are doing, because I find the history will be filtered through me and through my hands to give it a contemporary lens. And for like 30,000 years, we've understood ceramics through funerary use. And so it was a very important thing for me to address in my practice, I felt. And also out of the BC Achievement Foundation came this exhibition with MNP Tower. So I was invited to sort of fill this 45-foot wall and in the lobby of the MNP Tower downtown. And I used, these are larger paintings, 6 by 6 foot paintings. And then I think there were about 35 vessels that I threw. I'd actually just moved my studio, so I didn't have a working kiln at the time. And I reached out to all my potter friends. And I was just so grateful to the ceramic community who offered me their kiln and allowed me to achieve this deadline with, you know, the limitations that I was working in at that time. So it was pretty amazing just to feel supported by the community. And here's the last piece. This is, again, one of my wall pieces. And it's kind of the direction I want to move in right now, is thinking about ceramics for the gallery context again. And I'm interested in pursuing my MFA so that I can teach and so that I can really just have some years to develop my artistic practice further without so much pressure of needing to maintain levels of production. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's everything. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to follow along on my practice, definitely join my newsletter, which is, if you visit my website, you can join my newsletter or follow me on Instagram. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to hear what Cathy has to say too.
Thank you, Kate. Can you unshare your screen?
Yes.
Yay, there you go. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you certainly bring a lot of discussion in there, creativity, innovation, but also entrepreneurship. It's an interestingly tricky balance that you're trying to achieve. And we'll talk about that later. So now I'd like to introduce Cathy, who hopefully also has managed the technology better than I did earlier and can begin her presentation. Bear in mind, we have about 20 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Hi, my name's Cathy. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my path to clay and the evolution of my creative practice and some of the current projects that I'm working on. So I actually grew up in southwestern Ontario in a Mennonite community. My parents left the really conservative Mennonite community when just after they were married. But the main mode of transportation on the road that I grew up on was horse and buggy, and there was plenty of barn raisings in the area that I grew up in. And there was just a real resourcefulness in that place. Fences were mended, you know, if you needed something, it was a lot to climb in your buggy and harness up your horse. So you just kind of made do with what you had. And one of my very first memories was going to quilting bees with my neighbors and family members. And I loved to study the patterns and then also ask questions about or learn about where the different scraps of fabrics came from. So that was one of the first sort of handmade things that I was exposed to. And this is a quilt that was made by my great-grandmother. This is my daughter Hazel when she was a little bit younger. But my great-grandmother made this when she was 18, and it's all stitched by hand. So my very first first active rebellion, I guess, was when I was after high school. I decided to travel. There was lots of kids in my family, and we didn't, I had never been on an airplane before. So I started traveling, and for about the next 5 or 6 years, I traveled and worked. And one of the things that I became really interested in on those trips was the material culture of a place. So I became really curious about what sorts of things were being made where based on the traditions and the resources that were available. And whenever I had the chance, I would learn a craft or skill that was available, not in formal workshop settings usually, but if I ever had the chance to try a thing. Here's a picture of me. I took backstrap weaving from a woman in Guatemala, did some throwing in Turkey, and I didn't ever really do any visual art in high school. I grew up sort of doing things with my hands, and I always appreciated that. But when I decided that I was kind of ready to buckle down and do post-secondary, I decided that I would like to pursue art, and I chose Alberta College of Art and Design because because you would declare a major and specialize in one thing, which was really appealing to me. When I was at ACAD, I was taking a ceramic elective, and I remember going into the ceramics lab one day, and I saw on this dusty ware cart, I saw a piece of handmade pottery, like a soda-fired mug or something, with a decal on it. And it was this pivotal moment for me, because I remember thinking, this is all part of ceramics. This is all under the umbrella of ceramics. This reproduced print and a handmade thing. And so what sold me on ceramics is all the possibility. And I mean, yeah, it was all available under the umbrella of ceramics. I could make a toilet if I wanted to. It's what I realized. So that was exciting. So I started printing on clay. That became sort of my minor, and ceramics was my major. And I really wanted to figure out how to do multicolored transfer prints. So I started printing on plaster mostly, and Greg Pace was my instructor at the time. So he pulled out all of his old silk screens and he sort of guided me along. And I should say that also when I was in school, I had done some stained glass previous to this. So I started making glass and ceramic jewelry. And by the end of third year, I was putting myself through school and paying for my accommodations by selling jewelry through shops and museum shops and boutiques. But print was definitely my focus. And these are actually some pins that Greg Pace made in the 80s. They say Greg Pace 1984. And I just think that he was a great mentor and a great teacher, because he sort of let me fumble my way through this process and make all the mistakes. And also there's so much, without just handing me, the instructions on how to do this, he let me figure it out. And there's so much to be learned about, the nuance of material and process just by working through it. And of course, also in the 80s, everything was lead based. So I was learning I wanted to figure out how to do this multicolor registration in a safer and using water-based techniques. So after school, we moved to Nelson and started a family. And I really wanted to do some retail, but of course, Nelson is a seasonal town, and I was busy in the studio making the work, so I didn't want it to be a full-time or like a year-round thing. So I bought an old Airstream with another gal that I had met, a clothing designer, and we renovated it into a shop. And we sold the work of about 25 designers, Canadian designers. Most of the time, the shop was set up in Nelson in a back alley in the summer months. And then we also took it on the road. We took it to music festivals, craft fairs. We took it down to San Francisco a couple of times. And it was just a really nice way to get our work out there, because of course this was pre-Instagram. This was 2007, I think, when we had the shop. So it was a really nice way to get our work outside of Nelson. And yeah, so we did pop-ups. This was a pop-up in Portland, and we did West Coast Craft, and then we did the Calgary Folk Fest as well. So that was a really nice way to do retail. And then I was also doing wholesale at the same time, but it was just the perfect amount of retail to balance out that wholesale, and also to have the interaction with the customers was really nice. So this is the work. This was my mainstay within my production line for a long time. Multi-layered print, a slip layer on the bottom, and then an iron print and commercial decals in a final firing. In 2008, we moved to Saskatoon. My partner decided to go back to school, so I set up a studio in the laundry room next to the basement suite that we were living in. And I just really feel like in this conversation, I think it's important to say that, and also from what Kate was saying, I'm sure, and most of you know, if you're making a living as a ceramic artist, that there's as much creativity needed in, your lifestyle choices and figuring out how to make your dollars stretch or whatever, as there is in the actual studio. So yeah, I was supplying work to these to shops and galleries, and we had 3 kids at the time. And this was actually, for those 4 years, my ceramic practice was our only income. On our weekends, we loved to explore the prairies, the countryside and small towns. And there was one thing that was really unique to the prairies, is that there are lots of abandoned towns, which I found so unique. So we went to this one town, we discovered this one town called Bent's, and there was a dance hall, a general store, and a house. And in the general store, there was in all the buildings, and there was a grain elevator. In all the buildings, there was mail in the mailroom, and everything had just sort of been left. And it was just this unique experience to wander through these places and see, you know, this little piece of history that normally had like museum signs or whatever, or else it was completely looted and cleaned out. So anyways, I thought that was really interesting. And I decided that I wanted to make souvenirs for this town. Oh, I also had looked at a lot of images from what it looked like 5 years previous. And of course, things were disappearing. So I thought it'd be fun to make these souvenir mugs, and then place them in the town, stock the shelves of the general store, so that when people came to visit, they would take one of these souvenir mugs and leave the artifacts and the things untouched. So I made these pieces out in the Delta, and I made them on seconds of Highcroft mugs. So this was sort of my first place-based art piece. And these were made with water-based inglazed decals, if anybody cares. A little bit of a technical piece for you. So then, yes, the pieces were after I did a month-long residency at Medelta, and that was funded by the Ceramic Arts, or the Saskatchewan Arts Council. And then I put the pieces in the general store. Bents. In 2013, we moved to Yarrow, BC. For the first 2 months, I didn't have a studio, so I set up on the deck and I was making work. I feel like the wholesale thing just kind of, you got the orders coming in and you just sort of have to keep on going. So worked on the deck for a couple of months, and then eventually I turned this space into a studio. It was just a garden shed, and I just set up a kiln room and shelving and put some flooring down. And this is actually still my current studio today. There's always lots of work in there. It was always full to the brim. And I had one studio assistant at the time. I had a wholesale catalog, and I generally just I was always testing and experimenting, but I usually had several different lines of work that I would make at a time. And I always had this feeling that the best piece that I could make was the piece I hadn't made yet. So I always sort of have this like impulse to like, you know, while I'm making a thing, I feel like I'm always thinking about the possibilities of what's next. And I don't know, it's just sort of how my brain seems to work. These are inglazed decals again, water-based inglazed decals, which means that they're fired up to glaze temperature. So they're sort of like little abstract paintings on glazes, or transferred on top of the glaze. And I should say that all of the time, I always have had a line of jewelry that sort of evolves at the same time as the rest of my work. And whenever I have the opportunity to exhibit my work, I try to do that as well. And I was able to take part in a print symposium in Denmark in 2013. These are quilt plates that were referencing my personal history, my Mennonite history. And they're also plaster transferred. In 2016, Anthropology approached me about collaborating with them. And so I just did the designs, and they took care of manufacturing and distribution, which was actually a really nice process for me. I love the design process, and it was really fun to just make one thing and also apply my designs to different ideas that they had. Was actually a pretty satisfying process. These are garden stools that I made. So I just made prototypes, and then they made garden stools. And this was the whole family. There ended up being tableware, hardware, candles, furniture, maybe 25 pieces in total. And because that year I was their main artist collaborator, They ended up coming out, they sent 4 people out to do a film about, I guess, me and my studio practice. And that was fine, but I had this, at one point I just said to the main woman from the anthropology headquarters or whatever, I sort of said to her, you know, is there something a little bit weird about this, about you filming this, me working in my studio in Yarrow, when all of this work is actually made in China? And she leaned over to me and she said, nobody cares where it was made. And I felt like that really rubbed me the wrong way that she said that. Let's just say that. And because that has always been really important to me. I've always been really interested in where things are made. So that was actually really important to me. So I sort of felt like I could go either way at that point. I thought at one point that maybe that would be something that I would like, design and manufacturing would be something that I would be sort of the direction that I would take things. And then, yeah, I thought a lot about what I wanted to do and what sort of work felt meaningful to me and where I wanted to go from here. And I remember Martin Tagseth, who was a potter in Saskatoon, he talked a lot about making work that is accessible to the community where you live. And so, sorry, not right now, sorry. Sorry. So he had this cart called Pottery for the People that he took around. Martin sells his work in all kinds of international galleries, and he had this cart where he sold mugs for like $20 a piece to farmers and other people in his community. And I always thought that that was really cool. And I just like this idea of making work that's relevant and accessible to the people where you live. So I knew, of course, that there was a history of brick production in the Fraser Valley because of Clayburn mostly. And I thought, other than that, I had nothing. I had no idea. I had no idea about what was involved in harvesting clay. So I just started sampling. I went out with my assistant and we just started digging in different spots and testing. And I really didn't know what I was doing. But I basically considered the anthropology project to be like a grant because I didn't have to do as much wholesale that year. So I was able to step back a little bit from production and do more research. And that's what I decided to try to figure out. So the river, I ended up first digging clay on private property near the Chilliwack River, which is really close to my home. And we talked a lot about how to do that in a way that felt respectful. And so the deal was that I would only use shovels and buckets, and also a portion of the proceeds would go to the Wild Salmon Defenders Alliance so that it felt like the practice was regenerative in a way, and it didn't feel like I was just like pilfering off the land or whatever. And since then, I've had the opportunity to take lots of kids out, school classes or whatever, and we always work with the Indigenous support worker and Indigenous educators to talk about respectful ways of harvesting from the land. This was the very first piece I ever made with the river clay, which was kind of an emotional experience for me because it had, it just was, there was a lot leading up to that. I just really did not know. I didn't know the first thing about it. So it was very exciting. And it sort of turned into a real community affair when we go out to do these, to collect clay, which is so nice. We usually share a meal, and then people are always offering to come out and help. And that's been such a bonus of this project, is that there's so many people involved, and it really feels, that part of it has been really rewarding. Of course, there's lots of, we sieve the clay, we mix it, and we mill it. So there's lots of work that's involved in the processing. So it's given my kids, all 3 of my kids this has been their summer job at some point. And I just think that there's so much that we can learn about place from the raw materials here. This clay was formed 10,000 years ago when the glaciers melted in the valley. And there's hematite in the clay, in the rock around here. And so this gray clay ends up firing this beautiful, rich red color. So for the last, I guess I started this in 2018. Maybe I first started researching the clay, and then last year was the first year where I use only clay from here now in my studio. And just so everybody is really clear about where these pieces are made, I stamp the coordinates on the clay. That's the only decoration. I'm branching a little bit now, but when I first started, this was the only thing that I was making, clearly stamped with the place. So really just about material, process, and place. And I always loved the idea of making dinnerware from this clay. So I got a used ram press, and that's what I'm using to make the plates and bowls. And of course, it's because I have a ram press, it's an interesting tool to experiment with surface design. This is river clay with different pigments added, and then the colors are sort of layered and squished into the surface of the plates. And again, it's this curiosity that I have between industry, or how industry and craft can merge. And that seems to be a theme that keeps coming up in my work. I have recently started playing around with decals again on the surface of this unrefined clay, which has been really fun to sort of go back to that technique. And there's something about this, again, it's that raw unrefined material, and then these decals which are associated with mass production, and sort of the play of those materials, I guess, I find kind of interesting. And then also something that sort of looks like it's been unearthed or dug up from somewhere. I kind of had a Greg Pace moment again with this. I was at a auction for the Northwest Ceramics Foundation, and I picked up this jug from the Sally Michener auction table, and it's a piece that was made. I was drawn to it because the clay was so much like the clay that I'm using from the river. And then someone told me that it was, Deb actually said, "Oh yeah, that's Haney blue." Everyone was using Haney blue, and I don't know exactly when this jug is from, and I don't even know who made it, but I just realized again, I'm a little late to the bandwagon. And of course, this is something that's been done before, but I guess with these movements, the skills and the processes and the knowledge kind of ebb and flow too. So there's always room to sort of innovate and figure things out anew as these movements, I guess, come and go. This was a project that I did so in 2021, when they found when the news came out of the 215 graves in Kamloops, I just sort of impulsively thought I should just take some clay and give the kids give the students at the local school a way to process this news, I guess, in a tangible way. I didn't overthink it. I just emailed the school, and then the next day I took bins of clay and set up a table, and the students made these pinch pots. And then a year and a half later, which was, I guess, last fall, on the Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the Indigenous support worker in the school district thought that we should take those pots, and we had a ceremony, and the songkeepers and elders from the local band came, and they talked about the in Truth and Reconciliation, the importance of that sort of reestablishing that sacred connection between the environment and people. And so it felt like a really, we took these pinch pots and we put them, the students put them back in the river. And so it felt like a really nice sort of poignant action to return these pieces to the river. I've also had the chance to do some architectural projects. These are tiles that I made from the river clay, and it's at a local brewery here that just opened. And so the clay comes from very close to where the brewery is. And also because of the history of brick production, I feel like to use the clay for sort of architectural projects kind of makes sense. This is another, these are tiles that I made for a home in Vancouver. And of course, it's nice to be able to find opportunities to play around with composition and pattern. So this work is, these are lights that I made from clay that was from the foundation of a house and on the Sunshine Coast. And usually when excavation is being done, you know, excavators get really grumpy because the clay just clogs up their shovel and they have nothing good to say about it. And so it's nice to, I love the idea of doing more site-specific pieces with the clay from the foundation of a place. Okay, and last but not least, my shard pile. It's the quintessential picture. And I just want to say in closing that in addition to creativity and innovation, I feel like tenacity is a thing that is required to make a living from ceramics, and learning from your failures, shouldering the disappointment and the heartbreak of a failed kiln and experiments that where you spend weeks on and they don't go anywhere. And I feel like that's just been, it's been such a wonderful life lesson for me to learn through this practice. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Can you unshare your screen?
Yes.
Wow, thank you very much. That was, I have to say that your conversation's remarkable, but so are you. And I was sitting here listening to you, and I was sort of writing things down as I was going along, and I wrote creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, mentoring, experimental science, gender, environmental activism, cultural collectiveness, political awareness, Bauhaus, arts and craft movement, tenacity, blah, 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 just keeps going. So I think you're both absolutely amazing in what you've brought forward. I did have a question, but first I wanted to ask whether you had any, having listened to each other, whether you had any questions for each other or a comment about, you know, actually the intersections with your works, because I think on the surface you would appear to be quite different, but actually there's incredible number of intersections with both, I think, your philosophy, but also the way you go about things.
Mm-hmm. I could start that off by asking Cathy a question, maybe a little bit about, I'd love to hear more about other collaborations you've done aside from the anthropology collaboration and how those have gone and how you approach collaboration.
Yeah, I feel like since the anthropology collaboration, there's been lots of, mostly with like local businesses and that sort of thing, but then also some of the architectural projects. But I feel like any opportunity to work collaboratively is just such a good way to sort of get you out of your, you know, regular way of working and thinking about things. And just, I feel like I always learn so much from those experiences, and just applying what, you know, someone else's vision to what I'm doing has been really fun. And I feel like the printmaking has actually been such a great sort of toolbox for collaborations, because I feel like, you know, whether if it's like a business or whatever, you know, and they want somewhere, they want their logo on there, but they want like a handmade piece or whatever. I feel like I use those applications for collaborations all the time. So it's been great.
Let me ask
Can
a question. Is
Oh,
there what is it that is there a major, this is kind of an obvious question, I guess, but is there a major something that you have learned or have taken forward from what you might considered, when you look back and you go, well, that didn't really work. But with everything that doesn't work, at least on the surface, there's always something that you can pull from it. And I just wonder, because you both have done things that have come to an end, your mobile shop, your retail business, your, those kinds of things. They're not failures. I'm not implying that, but they came to an end. So what did you pull out of those? How did it move you forward?
Well, should I answer that question?
And
Well, I mean, it's been I closed the shop after Christmas, and I knew I didn't want to do another winter on Main Street because ceramic has these seasons to it. And from January to March, honestly, no one needs pottery. And that's usually when I go to Europe. And with the storefront, I was so rooted to that block, needing to maintain open hours. Retail's a whole other job than being a maker. And I think I knew it was a short-term project, and that I wanted to get back to my private studio model, not being the zoo animal, not being, the spectacle, but just being the artist alone with their work. And so I think there were so many benefits to having a public space, but the reality and the lived experience of working as an artist in public meant that I had stalkers. I had people tapping on my glass at night if I was there after hours. It was not the best environment for an artist to have like creative epiphanies, but it served a purpose in terms of building my audience and building my brand and my name recognition, which will carry forward. So it was, I think of it almost as like a degree. It just helped me build my business and build name recognition. But I knew it wasn't something that I could sustain for a very long time, especially given the just the economy and Vancouver. So yeah.
But Kate, would you it's just a thought, would you be interested if somebody comes along and says, I'm thinking of doing that, I'm thinking of trying something like that, because you have the experience. And I find one of the things that doesn't often happen is those experiences become yours, and then the sharing of them, we don't seem to have a proper vehicle to do that. And I don't quite know how that would work, but it would just seem to me almost a session, almost, or something where people that think it might be a good idea, or even to take up a pop-up shops. They do pop up all over the place. What works, what doesn't work, because that is the entrepreneurial side of things. And I think entrepreneurship and innovativeness are, bedfellows in so many ways. So
Absolutely.
you would?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to consult with people as they're, if people are taking on projects like that, and definitely to consult and provide information that I've learned. I am going to be popping up again in Mount Pleasant in sort of like a smaller scale studio that's in the same area. And so it'll be interesting to see how that feels, just as, where I'm still accessible to the public, but I'm just in a little bit more of a remote location where people know where to find me. So yeah, but it is also a transition space. When the new space that I'm taking it's in the city center motel, which has been, zoned for demolition, but David Dupre has rented the building and turned it into artist studios. And what works is that I'm running into electrical issues. And this is something, is like, as a potter, we're very, we have really specific studio needs. And I have a 60 amp kiln on a 20 amp breaker. And so I need more electrical, essentially. But thankfully, all these motel rooms each have like a 20 amp breaker, and I'm going to buy a smaller kiln and just anyways, but it'll be interesting to see how things evolve. But really what I'm trying to find right now is balance in my practice and more time with the exhibition work. Yeah.
How are you doing with balance, Cathy?
I think I'm getting way better at it. I feel like I didn't use, I mean, I think well, I think also there's times when you just don't have balance and you accept that. And then other times, like I feel like right now things are pretty balanced. I'm not really doing wholesale. And that's another thing I should say about collaborations is that that's sort of taken the place of wholesale. And then other than that, it's just direct sales. But there was a time a few years ago, and actually the reason that I got the press is because I was planning to open a retail production facility on the river. There's a new development on the river. And I was like, I had signed I think the letter of intent or whatever it's called. And I was fully planning to go ahead with that. And then I really, again, I mean, I feel like as I get older, I just so many times have to step back and say, like, what I could do this, but what do I actually want to do? What are my priorities at this point? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? And so I feel like for me now, it's becoming less about the like, you know, hamster wheel or whatever, and more about I'm just trying to be more like thoughtful about how I want to spend my time, what kind of yeah, what kind of legacy I want to leave, and is it worth it? Even though you can do it, doesn't mean that it's, it's the best thing for you.
It is so worth it. I mean, just listen to both of you when you hear the enthusiasm and commitment that you both have to your practice. It is worth it. I think both of you stretch so far and it seems to me that there's all new ideas are worth having a go at, and maybe that's why you end up with this balance. I mean, Kate's definitely moved in that sort of in sort of multimedia world more perhaps, and you have gone for the wild clay, which I think is amazing. And yeah, I think life-work balance is a challenge for everybody, but I think it's coming into more focus now with people who aren't necessarily trying to spend their life within a creative model. But I think the creative model is becoming the life side of the work-life balance that we're all striving for, however we express that. And I was looking at the chats, and everyone's very enthusiastic. They all think you're marvelous. Look at this. And but I don't see any particular questions, except somebody has identified your jug.
Oh, who is it? Who made that jug? And when?
Wait. It was right up there earlier. I lost it.
It's Deborah. I worked alongside Jane Williams. I know that jug very well. And she and I just put it in the notes there. She and I in Donna, Nevada, with Tam Irving's encouragement, said, go out and find some clay, because we were trying to figure out how we were going to survive after we graduated. And by the idea was that if we dug up our own clay, we would save money, right? So Jane Williams had a very successful practice for a couple of years, and then she left ceramics, sadly, because she was really talented. And Donna Nevada also was a wonderfully talented potter, and she only worked with the clay, the Haney clay, for a little while. I worked with it for 3 years until I started my family, and it was incredibly arduous because the clay we dug up, which I stole from a roadside, which I hope didn't cause a landslide, and we picked up a couple of tons in a giant plumbing truck, had to be cleaned, and it had to be, taken down, cleaned, all that stuff. And it was my main source for slipware, and it was a very arduous project. And after I started my family, I couldn't do it. But what beautiful clay.
Yeah, it fires the same as the clay that I'm using. And I mean, I imagine it's all from the same seam. So that's what was.
Yeah, we were near the Ruskin Dam. We were near there. So a little north. But you see that blue clay as Kate showed, you see it with all the construction sites.
Yeah.
We're just lousy with it. It's even on Salt Spring Island. I'm sure it's all over Vancouver Island too.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's in like Matsqui Flats. That same steam of like blue clay is down there. I have some from the Nickelmeckle River. That same beautiful, rich, deep, sort of gray blue clay. It's beautiful clay.
It'd be an interesting project because Don Hutchinson, Tam Irving,
Yeah.
and people before that. There was even a publication by Olea Davis and Davis and Don Hutchinson, I think, on clay, and this is in the 50s and 60s. You know, in
Yeah,
BC.
no.
So it's a book.
Yeah, I actually have some of those notes, I think.
Yeah.
John Hutchison's notes. I know it's an interesting thing, but I feel like that's also, it's sort of curious to me how these kind of, you know, I hate the word trends, but, or movements or whatever, how they kind of come and go. And of course, I mean, that was forever and ever. People just set up their potteries wherever there was clay. So that makes sense. And then when, you know, in the 50s and 60s or whenever you know, that was like a more popular thing. And I feel like now it's kind of popping up all over the place again too. There's this renewed interest in that. And I mean, even I feel like for me, the COVID was a big time when there was, or when there was a significant time when there was all kinds of questions about disruptions in supply chain and that sort of thing. You just started to think about, you know, using local products the same way that people think about using local, growing their food and eating, you know.
Yeah, but also COVID was the time when the life work balance really started to tip, and people moved. I'm doing some work right now on early clay, and Olea Davis, of course, from the early days, had incredibly interesting set tos with the Ministry of Highways in her attempts to get clay from Williams Lake. She couldn't understand why they wouldn't divert all the diggers to go out and pick up clay for her. And I'm just saying, entrepreneurship, you know, innovation, activity, it's there. And your working with bricks was so interesting because I'm just doing research on that too. And first brickworks were 1853 in British Columbia. So what goes around comes around and comes around. Except I think that you're both your tentacles are moving more because the world around you is changing so much, and I don't think that you can become just the center of a hurricane in all of that. I think you have to address what is going on, and I think both of you do that so brilliantly in your very different ways. I'm thinking, Deborah, it's probably time to wrap up because we've gone over time, of course. But if there isn't any more questions, could you please, I mean, Kate and Cathy are very available in social media. And did you put your website up, Cathy? I can't remember.
I didn't.
Put it in our chat right now. Just put it in our chat right now.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
It's on our website and it's on
Right.
any of the communications that I've set out. So if they go to the website in the speaker series, it's got their where to locate them.
Yeah, okay. Because I think it's really important. I mean, it's part of the whole, you know, conversation is actually to have the conversation beyond this group, but much, much further. Yes, David.
Carol, I have a question. Great presentations and fascinating work. I'm interested in the mentoring process because all this experience and creativity I'd like to see expand out and so we can share more stories and more experiences in the future. Could they talk a little bit about the interest in mentoring and whether they're participating in that or whether they will in the future to share what they know with others that might want to do similar things? Thank you.
I can speak to that. Yeah, I'm definitely in a position now where I have a lot of emerging ceramicists approaching me for mentorship, and I would love to do the early career development grant as a mentor with a mentee. And that's something that BC Arts Council has suggested, that I, can find an apprentice basically to work under me. And that would be a really great way to pass on what I've learned, and they get funding. So if there is out there an emerging artist who would be interested in having me as a mentor, I would be totally open to doing an early career development. I think the grant goes in June. And so there's a couple months now where we could get together and come up with a mentorship structure. And then that applicant can get up to $30,000 to do a mentorship with me or anyone, but I would be open to doing that with somebody if, and that's what I did with Guylan, and it really helped me set up myself professionally. And yeah, now I do feel like I'm in a position where I want to share what I know. That's also why I'm going back to school to do my MFA so that I can teach in a university context. And yeah, because what's all this research for if we're just keeping it for ourselves, right? That's sort of how I feel.
You want to
agree.
comment?
Point. Yeah.
Kathy?
Oh, I feel like I would be happy to do mentorship too. And the thing, I mean, I've sort of been doing that in schools right now. And I actually just did a big community project on Friday with a local school. So in addition to sharing with other ceramic artists, except that I feel like with my, in regards to sharing with like workshopping, this sort of thing, I feel like I always feel like there's some limitations in what I do because some of my processes aren't necessarily all that accessible. Like, for example, I just happen to live in a place and I feel like not everybody is going to be able to go and harvest their own clay. And there's so much involved in processing and all of that. So I'm happy to share it, but even in offering workshops, I feel like there's definitely some limitations in terms of the accessibility of it. But I am really excited about more community projects and going into the schools and sharing this with community members. And yeah, I've just applied for a public art project where community members would come together to make small parts to form a big installation. And I think that for me, the most exciting thing about using clay from here is just making this connection for people between raw materials or between people and their environment, basically.
Okay. If I can probably wrap up, I'd like to thank you both for making this Innovation and Creativity Day very special. I think that in honesty, we're at the beginning of a very interesting conversation that can go on. And those that could attend today and those that do pop into our website and listen to what you have to say, hopefully will bring even more creativity and innovation at the risk of sounding, whatever.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. So I think a lot of people have had to go, but those that are left could perhaps, if you turn your picture on to say goodbye.
Yes,
And Deborah has any other.
just to thank you all so very much, and yeah, send comments through the website, about this, ideas about mentorship. I think is really, really interesting. And something that can lead us forward to other ideas. So, and wild clay. Such a great
Wild clay. Environmental actions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. I feel like I should have said that right off the top. Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, it was
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I will end the meeting for all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
all. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.